Oregon Chief Justice Martha Walters issued an order that put tight restrictions on court operations. To protect everyone's health around the state, she's trying to reduce the number of people inside courtrooms statewide. Her order pushes back all criminal, civil, and other trials, hearings, and proceedings until after June 1st. This means a lot of domestic relations proceedings in family court, like divorce, custody, and changes to those orders, will be put off or done a different way. There are exceptions for certain proceedings, which, if possible, will be done remotely. People can still file and get hearings on urgent cases like restraining orders, elder abuse and disabled abuse orders, sexual abuse orders, extreme risk protection orders, motions on immediate danger, custody of a child held in violation of an order, and motions to enforce parenting time. Family law attorney Jill Brittle says she can do quite a bit of work remotely with clients to move their cases forward, but a lot of critical trials and hearings now have to wait.
There's a lot of frustration and a lot of uncertainty about what that means, specifically people who weren't sure how to handle their parenting time agreements. Would those change?
Justice delayed is justice denied.
A lot of times there are things that are time sensitive or that don't make sense to wait 6 or 9 months. So in those situations, waiting has a real impact on people.
With people losing their jobs and school canceled, a lot of families have to scramble to figure out child custody and support. Emotions run high in family court. Couples and their kids are usually in crisis.
It absolutely amplifies that fight or flight feeling that we get when we're in crisis. And people don't make the best decisions when they're in crisis.
Some couples who plan to split up are changing course now because of the downturn in the economy.
It has a ripple effect on all the agreements that people have made.
So Brittle's phone isn't ringing off the hook with people wanting a divorce, but she expects it might when the stay-home order is lifted. Morgan Romero, KGW News.